Al-Umayyah, the Umayyi family. Al-Ashira Al-Qurashiyah, the tribalism of Quraysh. And Al-Qabaliyah Al-Arabiyah, which can roughly be upgraded today to mean Arab nationalism. These elements were at work prior to the Prophet, to the Quran, and to Islam. And then all of a sudden, as if coming from nowhere, this society that had these three important and integral elements to it was presented with a problem. Islam is justice. Allah is justice. The Quran is justice. And family solidarity, clannish interests, nationalist priorities, they don't recognize this type of justice. And the struggle began. And it continued in these years that we are familiar with. The years referred to as the Meccan era and the era of Medina. We don't have to cover this territory because we have a sense of what it was about. The area that we have to cover, though, is that towards the cumulative 23rd year of this lifelong effort of centered around justice and equality and participation of the people and freedom of conscience and thought, what happened was that these forces of Al-Usra Al-Umayyah, Al-Ashira Al-Qurashiyah, and Al-Qabaliyah Al-Arabiyah, they found these forces that cling to these notions found themselves at a loss. They lost. They lost this confrontation with Allah and His Prophet and the committed Muslims who broke out of this mold. They no longer recognize family relationships, tribal clannishness, and national interest. That no longer was part of their mind or soul. But some people still had that. When Allah's Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he returned to Mecca, there was a class of people that had fought against him. There was a population of people that spent a generation in a war against him. And now they had to make up their mind. They either become Muslims or they would have to leave that territory altogether, or they would have to fight and die. Looking back at 22 years, they thought and they saw the best thing to do now, the only choice left, is to become Muslims. And we are speaking here particularly about Abu Sufyan and Muwaiyah. So they became Muslims. And the rest of Mecca became Muslims. And we may refer to them as Quraysh at-Taliqa, nationalist Quraysh that was amnestied now by Allah's Prophet. To refresh our memories, we have to remind ourselves that Abu Sufyan and Muwaiyah took charge of the military force in Mecca against the military force in Medina after Badr. In Badr, seniors, shuyukh, commanders died, and the opposition in Mecca needed a leader, and Abu Sufyan was to fill in that gap. And he thrust the mushrik forces against the Islamic forces in Medina. In other words, he brought an army from Mecca to Medina to threaten the Muslims twice, in Uhud and in Al-Khandaq. And in both instances, there was no victory. So Mecca now was beginning to feel the psychological defeat of its encounter with the committed and the devout Muslims of Al-Madinah. But now, these age-long enemies of Islam became Muslims. When the Prophet of Allah, subhanah, when this Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, when he went to Mecca, how did he deal with these people now who said that they are now Muslims? They've been fighting the Muslims for over 20 years, and now when the power of Islam grew to an extent that they no longer could challenge, he said, now we are Muslims. And what did the Prophet alayhi afdalu salah wa atammu taslim, what did he do at this moment? He said, when he saw that Mecca right now is no longer resisting, he said, whoever enters the residence of Abu Sufyan is secure, is safe. The Prophet also gave Abu Sufyan and his son Muwaiyah 100 livestock. He gave each one 100. Why? Because we have to take a moment to think about this. You cannot help, you are not permitted to help a shaitan against these types of people. These were living in the higher positions of society. Now they are defeated. So the Prophet of Allah called them at-tulaqa, so that he would give an accurate definition of their status. The Quran called them al-mu'allafa qulubuhum, those who are left to be won over through their hearts. In a condition like this, you want to be forthcoming for those whose hearts and minds have been broken after all of these years. So he offered them. The Muslims were generous towards these tulaqa, or towards these mu'allafa qulubuhum. There was a revenue from the Islamic budget that would go to them to help them overcome this psychological retreat, this inferiority position that they found themselves in. Remember also that Allah's Prophet